Welcome to episode 13 of the Less Consulting Puff podcast. This week, Alisdair is joined by the highly respected Interim CFO and Global SAP Transformation Leader, Andrew Meyrick. And as always, the discussion centers around the real-world challenges that need to be overcome to sustain and embed any form of complex business change. Enjoy. Dragon ERP helps mid-tier organizations define and deliver their intelligent SAP journey. Request your copy of our SAP SaaS ERP Customer Adoption Guide that covers everything the C-suite must consider to plan for success. Why does this matter? Well over 70% of SAP programs stall. They don't fail, but they certainly struggle to deliver the expected outcomes. So if you need help, then speak to a dragon.
Right, so here we go. Welcome to another edition of a Less Consulting Puff podcast. And I'm joined by Andrew Meyrick, who is a digital CFO. And he's really a very special digital CFO. He's rolled out SAP to 9 of the largest SAP customers in the world over a long period of time. Really well respected within the SAP ecosystem and the wider global CFO community. So it's really an honour and a pleasure to have Andrew with us today. And we're going to deal with some of the topics that's on Andrew's mind. So hi, Andrew.
I have to say thank you for inviting me. Alisdair and I worked together. And in fact, we found out that we worked together too before with Cable and Wireless, but I brought him on as my EA with Deutsche Börse and Contigo, where we had a lot of fun. So yeah, my questions centered around, we've done a little bit of pre-prep, ladies and gentlemen. One of the things that's always bugged me is the data environment. Where does it start? Who's running it? Who checks it? And do we get out at the end what we want in the right format? So my question really to Alisdair is that one talks about core to transform. And the core data, if you're in a SAP environment, if you've got data coming from NetSuite or some other environment, it's in whatever state it's in. Probably never clean, not up to date. Even some of the formats are not what you really want in the new world. And of course, you've got the mindset of the users with a legacy mindset. We've always had it like this. This is how we like to deal with it. We've always played with BW rather than this or that. And so most of my experiences always centered around the nightmare experiences are where the core is never clean. And also the other problem, and we discussed this briefly before, everything's done too little, too late. The people are not there to do it. The backfills, the SMEs who really know what they're looking for. Has anybody thought about master data governance? Has anybody thought about where that's centered? Who does it? What country? If you've got one country and one company, and it's quite big, it's quite different to one where you've got numerous companies all over the world in different languages, different shapes, and even localized layout. Because when you want to bring a template on, a global template, for example, we had this with Deutsche Börse, and Alisdair and I had it with Cable and Wireless, with Wallace. And there was a global template. But the data, in all these cases, often not clean. So my question is to Alisdair, it's still an ongoing problem, isn't it? And what is SAP doing about it? What can it do themselves? Or do they say, well, you need to do this or that and advise? But because they're providing the product, they don't necessarily want to get too involved in the operational cleanups. They say, well, you give it to us when you've got it from here. You decide what you keep in legacy or don't bring across, and we can do this for you with your guys and our guys. So to me, the data issue still seems to be a big, big issue.
I think that's right. I mean, I think sitting in the turnaround space, one of the biggest issues I see constantly is data. And coming off of Sapphire last week and then London Tech Week this week, data's been in my mind, and I've been asking myself a question. I've been reaching out to some of the people in the SAP ecosystem, asking them the question in terms of the move from legacy SAP to S4 is problematic, really problematic. The take up is not where SAP want it to be. S4 was not mentioned at all at Sapphire, didn't get mentioned. Okay. And even today, most migrations struggle. So there's the rule of thumb that 70% of SAP transformation programs fail. They don't fail, okay, but uniformly, when they get to the 65 to 70% point on the program, they stall, okay? Yeah. And one of the major reasons they stall is because of data, okay? It's one of those areas.
Yeah.
There used to be integration was a problem, and I know we're going to talk about that later, but data. So started to think about, let's start to break down that problem and look at what we're seeing. And the first thing you see is that it's still the usual suspects in that SAP data migration space. So even though there are quite a few providers out there, obviously specializing SAP migrations, okay? And a SAP migration shouldn't be particularly difficult. The real Achilles now for SAP migrations, whether it's a blue field or a brown field, or you're doing a greenfield reimplementation, is data migration. And you think, well, that's interesting because you've got a couple of really big companies out there offering stuff, selected data, you name it, and you've got AI. So why are so many SAP programs struggling with data migration, which is then causing them to slip and to delay and causing so much angst, and also that paranoia for failure is driving CIOs and CFOs not to move into S4 at the moment, to take a step back. So the failure point is on two points, I think. One is clean data. So SAP are absolutely obsessed by clean core and clean data. They're obsessed by it. It's become it's gone from being a doctrine through to an ideology. You know, they're almost cultish in their thirst for clean core and clean data. And the reality is most customers get it badly wrong because, as you say, they think about it too little too late. And the reality is, I think, most organizations now can start to clean their data using AI. There's a lot of simple AI tooling out there now, which is cheap as chips, which is agnostic. So you don't need to go to SAP. You can go to one of the hyperscalers, which will drop in onto your data fabric. So it could drop into Salesforce, or it can drop into Vertex, as an example you used earlier. It can drop down in, because it's software agnostic, and always really looking at is the master data.
Sure.
And SAP have brought out in the MDG space a nice AI tool which just does that, goes into your master data and does sort of like address cleanse. It's all the stuff you'd expect. So AI loves dirty data. It really does. It really does. And it addresses your problem, which is the organization's never got enough people to go in and do that data cleanse because it's so time consuming, isn't it?
I think that and also the decision by the organization, do they internalize it to do it or go third-party supplier? And often they get nervous about giving it to third-party supplier.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll do it. It is a skill set. And that's why the third-party suppliers, in many ways, I think are better. You know the one I'm talking about, where they did internalize. And the poor guy who was running it had a day job already.
Yep. But I think there's all.
He had to build a team to do this, and of course it caused massive backlogs because every single item of addresses and contract detail had to be checked, then put through and tested, properly tested, and kept on coming back, bouncing back between the different environments, and this was totally undercalculated at the time it would take, and then you got the natural logjam.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think. By using AI, you automatically, I mean, one of the things you do is you look at your legacy system Okay. And you then look at the tooling which is available from that legacy vendor,
Yeah.
okay, in that space. So example being when you look at ECC, SAP ECC, what a lot of people don't know is that you can actually in ECC do the conversion to the business partner object. So that's taking the customer vendor, yeah, and the supplier vendor and merging them into this new business object, which is the business partner. Okay.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
really problematic. One of those great failure points in the ECC to S4 migration. You can actually do that in ECC. So it's all done, ready to go. But that's easy. I mean, I think, again, in our ecosystem, there's so many fools out there, so many pre-sales lizards who don't understand the subject. So if your problem statement is my vendor and my supplier master data, well, any fool can fix that, really. It doesn't take a lot to work out what you need to do to fix that and to get the tooling and to put a plan in place and get that right. But the real data, the real migration failure points are far more complex than that. So the real failure points will be in terms of bills of material, complex bombs,
Yeah.
or in FMCG, complex menu cards. Okay.
Mhm.
On where the bomb's constantly changing because you've got variant config built in. So you think about automotives and
Yeah.
bag manufacturers or whatever, where they've allowed their ECC system to build in variant config, so the bomb is really complex. That's really complex master data. Or another example of complex master data is in production planning rules, whereby you've got some really complex production plans which you need to migrate, you know. So
Yes. We had
yeah,
it's very interesting
mm,
you touched on that topic because we had that problem with Open Hydro. Because there we had the engineering team had 30,000 items on a bomb.
mm,
Procurement were dealing with like 5,000. The two never joined. We had
yeah,
to deconstruct. And I think it's a very, very good point you're making is that it's selling the whole story that this is interdependence. When you roll out these systems
yeah.
or even improve on them or upgrade them, the interdependence on the different departments is so critical. Because without that, and I've seen this so many times, we had that not just in cable and wireless, but also in a way we had it also with Deutsche Börse and Cordigo. It's getting them all along the flow line.
Yep.
Unless you get the process, because we're talking about AI, we're talking about information flow. In the end, S/4HANA is X, ECC is Y, and S/4HANA can produce it in a completely different way, quicker,
Yeah.
the single entry, etc. So your mindset has to sort of adapt to, well, we don't need to do it like this. We can actually do it like this because actually what is here will be seen everywhere simultaneously.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Absolutely.
Oh, tables of fields, they just do it behind the scene and you don't have any worry about, well, did it get there? It's there. So the mindset I found also with something about data is who wants what in what format? Because actually, in the end, procurement has to be able to talk to
Yep.
the seller, the supplier, in a cogent manner with the right codes, which have come from the supplier. Well, this is what we call it. For the engineering people haven't got that. It's
I,
that.
I think it's a really good point because I think we've got a real example currently of an SAP program which has just been put on hold.
Mm.
And the reason they were put on hold is they were doing phase zero. And this customer was moving to S/4HANA public cloud, which is quite a tight template. And they were starting, they'd already made the decision to move to SAP. They'd not done much due diligence. They started to look at their product life cycle management data, so the BOM and everything around the BOM, and they realized that the issue was more the legacy PLM solution than it was the data. So they've had to stop the SAP program to then look at what do they do with the PLM system first.
Yeah.
Okay. Or another example, as you mentioned, procure to pay. You're seeing a lot of SAP customers now using tools like Coupa in the cloud. So more plug and play. So SAP is doing less, but it still might be the master and it's more complex. So I think there's the bit about leaving it too little too late, because I think you've got to do, when you say you have to do a data strategy, you really do. So you have to think in terms of
Yep.
enterprise architecture.
Absolutely.
Okay. You have to look at the entire data model.
Mm.
Okay. You have to look at all those required outcomes in terms of reporting outcomes. So as you said, the end user's king. They want to see this data.
Yeah.
They need to understand. You really need to understand what historical data goes through for comparisons.
Yep.
We need to understand our data fabric and those data warehouses. You mentioned BW earlier. There was 18,000 BW users. They're
Yeah.
not going to move into BDC. But what they'd like to see is they'd like to see agentic AI dropped onto BW to get some better reporting.
Of course.
So I think it starts with, you have to start almost with a sheet of paper.
Mm.
You have to do a proper data as is to understand all your data outcomes, all your data repositories. You need to understand that data model. You need to understand your data retention. You need to understand what you want to drive going forward out of SAP and non-SAP. It's a huge piece,
Awesome.
and leaving your data strategy until you've got SAP underway and then you think it's simply a data migration piece, that's where it just falls over.
Yeah.
It just, because it's so much more than that.
But you mentioned there, which is topical to the next question, which I was going to ask you about, is that the experience I've had, this term plug and play, APIs and
Yeah.
the the, the mid-engine linking
Mm,
external to internal, etc. My experience has been dependent on the corporation, dependent on the levels of compliance, regulation, and all that sort of
mm,
stuff. It can be incredibly tight. And although the IT can do what they would like to do, they are constrained by compliance and regulatory to say, no, we can't have them coming into us in here. They need to come in this way and they can't be in that way. So APIs and all these sort of things. And the example I gave you was we had with Vertex, which was a very good engine, online engine, but it's dynamic.
yep.
It's checking, doing calculations of tax, especially in America, as you know, in the states and in the federal level and down at state level, different rates, etc. That Vertex need, their perfect situations, however, to be embedded to extent, if possible, because then it's properly linked up
Mm,
to the invoice, not churning backwards and forwards. And we had real nightmares to get permission to do this because of compliance and
yeah.
security. This seems to be an ongoing issue. I'm just giving one example,
Mm,
but there are many others one could use. Because when you've got an extranet and you've got, especially on the
yeah.
procurement, these other systems that SAP works with, it all fine and dandy that you've got the ability for the supplier to plug in and say, look, here's my list here,
Mm,
etc., and get it through. The main question is, will it be allowed? How long will it take to actually permit it to be in? Now, some companies, this isn't a problem, but I know you mentioned one
yeah.
where they were having a problem, the whole thing nearly died because of it.
Yeah.
Can you give some other examples? This is obviously still an ongoing nightmare.
It is. I think it's a really good example you've given, because I think one, Vertex is really very, very well known as a SAP Eco partner
Yeah.
in terms of tax. And everywhere I go, Vertex will be in the architecture. I think there's also, depending upon sort of like the industry sector, there are a number of big niche cloud applications which bolt on. So if we think about the finance domain,
Mm.
you've got Blackline. So Blackline is that partner which does sort of like GL and does a lot of stuff around period end. That's
Yeah.
cloud-based. There's an example. A lot of finance organizations have got into hyper automation years ago. So they really are dependent upon third-party cloud applications, whether it's things like Reuters,
Yeah.
for FX. SAP has always been an integration hub. So SAP's the platform. In the finance space, has always been plug and play, whether it's treasury, whether it's FX, and I think it's a really good question now, because I think geopolitically, I think it's Axon being being a huge global insurer, do a risk report every year in terms of geo security.
Sure.
And it's interesting that on one hand, the big enterprise vendors are saying cloud first, cloud first, cloud first, building out the ecosystem, plug and play, use API. That's all very mature. We've been doing that for probably over 20, 25 years. And
Yeah.
during that period of relative peace globally, before maybe the BRICS started pulling away, before all the other stuff going on. But I think now you have this real situation whereby, especially off the back of some of the big hacking sensations over the last couple of months, we won't go into the names,
Yeah.
which have really impacted those organizations. I saw one organization has already predicted a £600 million hit on their P&L this year
Sure.
because of the hacking impact of something which has happened.
Yeah.
And that's going to make organizations really think now about locking
Yes.
down.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got to. And then so it's a really good question. So do you again go back into and say, right, okay, Vertex is an example, it's dynamic, okay, but are you going to go into a situation whereby you've almost got to have in your architecture design, you're on a private cloud, okay, so private cloud's cool. Most private clouds now are heavily locked down, so SAP are talking sovereign clouds. So you'd have your SAP instance in Germany or in a UK data center heavily locked down. Fantastic. I think you're almost now moving into a realm whereby a lot of the bolt-on cloud partners will need to start thinking about their private cloud solution, whereby you almost have the ability to then bring into next to your SAP in the private cloud, the black line, the Vertex, and you're almost building out your own data center again, but within a hyperscaler. And you're inside a security wrapper, essentially.
Yeah, and you're giving the confidence to the client, because this is all about it doesn't take much to get an exco or a steerco nervous when something pops up. This is, and you and I know this is big money. It's always big money. It always turns out to be probably twice as much as one expects to spend and twice as long, depending on its complexities. So it's serious money, which a lot of the exco people want to have spent elsewhere. I had this in a particular part. They're saying, why is this spending costing so much? Because we have to do this and that and this and that. And yeah, but we've got success factors. Yes, but just because HR have got this, they're going to have to adjust to us for the way they do things. Why? We're quite happy with what they've got. Yeah, and we're bringing in from this company over here, there. We're going to get rid of their HR module and we're going to put them on success. All these batters at the end with ERP, and this is why it's often so often not seen and not communicated well, because as you know, I led a big one not too long ago, and my skill sets were demanded massively on stakeholder management of the exco and the steerco. That's where I had to really shine, because if I didn't shine, nothing was going to happen. No more money would come. There'd be holdups. If I couldn't explain the rationale why we were doing things, and then get the buy-in of each person, not just the CIO, but there's the HR director, the marketing, because they were doing their lovely thing over here on SFDC, but had never talked to anybody about what they were doing. It's often the case. It's a major, and then when you start talking about security, as you say, malware and attacks, etc., they are naturally very nervous today. And you've got to put them at rest very quickly and say, it's not an issue. We're locked down here. Yeah, but what does this mean, private cloud? What does it mean? Can you do both? So today, rolling out these things, irrespective if you've got migrations from other systems, have to be really well planned through on, this is a really good product, guys. We want to use it to keep your American customers happy and the suppliers. So you do the selling job, and then got to do another selling job to another part of the company that this is perfectly secure and it will do what it says on the tin within the environment, keeping you safe, with everything working from a simple person pressing an invoice button and it does it. And you don't have to look as it's done it right, all the way down to the end, to the right percentage rate on the tax rate down in Milwaukee. Really? Yes.
And I think that's right, because I think you have to. I think one of the issues is governance. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, coming back into the finance domain and heavily regulated organisations. Okay. And that need to be able to demonstrate to your auditors that you're making informed decisions at the right times.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bit about risk management. Okay. And people roll their eyes about risk management. But risk management is really important, because I think you have to look at the impact to the enterprise, and you have to really think about enterprise risk management. And then I think you then have to say, right, okay, if you're going reporting to an exco, the one thing the organisation really has to think about is operational impacts, yeah, and reputational damage, and that's investor reputational damage. So you have to look at operational impact. So I think the first thing, we spoke about data. Why does data get left? Why do people not focus on data? Because there's an element of risk on that.
Yeah.
But then if you look at information security, why are there so few people in the organization who understand
It's
infosec?
amazing. Yeah.
And then why again is it always overlooked? So why do you have a situation whereby you can pull together a business case or a benefit case, but you never build in what is infosec? What does it mean? What is the cost of infosec? What does it do to the total cost of ownership? What does it do to your benefit case?
Totally.
Because you could, as you said, you could have an amazing benefit case for doing Salesforce, or an amazing benefit case for doing success factors. So HR have got these wonderful dreams, Workday and success factors, wow them with all the stuff you can do.
Yeah.
You can put it into sovereign cloud now, but you need to factor in the cost of infosec around that. And what does that do to the CCO? And also, what does it do in terms of restricting some of the process flows? So some of that functionality might need to be pared back. And I think it's very interesting, because many years ago, back in 2013, I had to do Jaguar Land Rover. I led the turnaround at Jaguar Land Rover in the SAP space. One of the things we had a fantastic CIO, Jeremy. And one of the things he was really hot about was information security, even back then. And then we brought in, I can't remember who it was, might have been KPMG or PwC. And we did a proper infosec review of SAP ECC6 at the time, in terms of encryption and really locking down SAP. So we did the technology side of it. We did the process control frameworks. We had technology really locked down. We had a process control framework in SAP for finance, really locked down. And then he even went as far as doing physical security controls, whereby they paid security consultants to come in and really test the ability to break in and get in, all that type of stuff. They took it really seriously. And I think that's really missing at the moment, whereby you write out a business case, and that information security piece should be really full. It should really talk about the risk and how you're going to remediate that risk and what the cost of that is going to be.
Yeah, there has to be a presence of somebody. I mean, we found in our group that actually somebody arrived quietly, was appointed as like CSEC or whatever we call it, and but he wasn't dragged into anything. I mean, he sat in a complete separate for quite a long time, and I had to take him through so he could really challenge the status quo of what was going on quite rapidly. It is incredibly important, and I think it just go back to this whole. We talked about master data governance. We talked about the ownership even on the RACI diagram, which I believe is a really strong one of who does what and when, because as you know very well on these implementations, it's getting people to the party, because often the top people in the group don't really want to be involved. They're quite happy to sign off when it's actually said it's all okay. But actually they are critical at times to walk them through and say, is there anything you found missing? We've done a gap analysis, guys, but for you. But have you read it? No, I haven't read it. But I think it's really quite critical, because your marketing team are doing this over here. Very exciting stuff. We can plug us in to the front end. Or your data warehousing people and the whole, product life cycle people have been doing this. They've got this software over here. They love it, but things will change when we bolt this on at the frontier, because we can either bring it in to be done by SAP, or we keep it there and it progresses through. You've got some very sexy stuff in the manufacturing environment, which is very specialized software, like we had with Smith with packaging and paper, which was unique to them. Maybe to other companies too, like how much ink would go in to do the paint. The calculating machines that did all this, they had to all work all in synchronization with everything else and the machinery. And I think you're absolutely right. This life cycle from the very start to the finish often is done in bits, and it shouldn't be. I've learned now. I mean, when we were doing cable wireless, we were I was rolling out in Panama, which is quite different to the Caribbean.
Yeah.
The Caribbean was doing fixed plugs and telephones and stuff. Panama was into mobiles, which nobody really was probably into, and they were doing fulfillment stuff like that. And so I said, "Do it outside?" No, we actually do it all. We do the preparation. We take the symptoms. I said, "Right. Well, this is quite critical. We get this all rolled in properly and not in bits." And I think the lesson I've learned, and this is the great thing about this whole environment, whether you're dealing it with NetSuite or all these other products, is learn the lessons well of the mistakes, and really note them. Always keep on looking for the gap, because to me, it's everything that appears in front of you looks fine, should be. It's what is missing.
Yeah.
What is missing in reporting? What is missing in this transactional flow that somebody along here wants to have it, but it's not there? The workflow sign off. I found so often, is when we use Java. So what's that? Atlassian for the project management tool. Jira.
Yeah.
Jira all nicely interfaced with SAP. No, not quite, but and then the people doing it, and then the timelines and the approvals and sign-offs. Often in all this whole thing, one area has done their bit, but they're not actually sure, well, does it really link up and does it work with all these other people?
I think that's absolutely true, because with these programs, the programs stall because you run at the slowest speed. So your critical path is really driven by the slowest.
Totally, always. Yeah.
And the providers will always shoot off. So the SI is always over the horizon and gone. They've left the customer. Finance are with you for every 2 weeks out of every 4, because for 2 weeks they're doing
absolutely can't see them
so they've drifted off. And we did a thing recently, we just sort of like analysed, and you see this when you know this because you're all about transformation delivery. But when you do transformation, you look at a 52-week cycle, you're working for these big organizations, and these big global organizations are already people and process optimized. So there's not many people around. Okay. You don't have many SMEs. And then you realize out of 52 weeks, 15 weeks a year is probably taken away from you. Okay. And that's not including your golden quarters as well, where you lost.
Absolutely.
And reason being is because you've got all the holidays, you've got the bank holidays, you've got people with kids will want to go on holiday at the time when people with kids aren't on holiday. So that extends it out. So you then lose most of the summer, you lose most of Easter, Whitsun, you then lose a load of time because of Christmas, and you really don't realise that if you think...
That's on the international front, my friend.
Yeah.
Because nothing ever ties over
absolutely.
each country.
So the amount of dead time you have on a program as well, you have to... So you've got stuff running slowly, you've got tons of dead time, and then you've got a critical path which people just don't want to expose, because if you looked at the critical path, you'd always realise from day one. And I think it goes back to your point at the beginning, and this is a really good point to catch up on, which is, too little, too late. Okay. And I think that goes back to the planning piece. Quite often there's too little planning too late, because people will not do the detail. And if you do a proper phase 0 at the beginning, where you drive out your target operating model, which is not SAP. Your target operating is your target operating model.
Absolutely.
Understand your as is. Even understand what SOPs you've got. Take a step back and look at your data model. Look at what your model wants to be going forward and what your outcomes are. Look at your integration. Look at your infosec. And then, really importantly, then look at your organisation and think about how are you going to deploy this?
Who
How are you
we-
going to
who we are.
land this bloody thing? Because
Totally, yeah, it is because it's like an analogy I use like an airport. It's got so many bits,
yeah,
unless you've got the ramp, unless you've got the
yeah,
runway, unless you've got the guys who actually, even the mingies, doing the stuff to shipping
yeah,
stuff. And I think it's almost what I've learned. You almost have to have like what is called a pre-plan.
yeah, absolutely. A plan for the plan. Because if you think about it, a,
Content.
a lot of programs are comfortable. So, you've done your phase 0,
Yeah,
you've done your design. So it's still comfortable. It's just a core team, SMEs and workshops. Nice.
yeah,
You're doing your build. You're starting to think about test. You could even blag UAT because you could bring users in. But at the 70% point, the program stops when the users start to see the solution in the UAT and you start to think about what does deployment really look like.
exactly.
Boom, it stops. And then you have a break for a while where people think about what UAT should really look like. They think about the organization widely. They think about how you're going to deploy it because you've probably got, you've got procurement outsource, you've got finance shared service centers, IT said, and they hadn't really thought about deployment. They hadn't thought about UAT. They hadn't thought about follow the sun. Yeah. And then suddenly there's a reality check in the program. It stops for about 3 or 4 months and it gets going again. And that's what we see all the time. Doesn't mean the program failed. It
No,
just
no, no.
means,
And the UAT is so key. It's done properly. I mean, I'm always fairly ruthless with the guys. I mean, to say, you're looking. I need you to be looking for
yeah,
issues. I don't
yeah,
want you to skimp. I don't want you just to do jumps. I know this is boring as SH1T
yeah,
to do, and you've got to do this, but you need to do it. Why? Because you're going to prove you will become a
yeah,
subject matter expert. You realize? I don't want to be well, you're going to be, okay? We're not going
yeah,
to backfill people temporarily from Czechoslovakia or whatever. You will be the guy leading this who will
yeah,
then be training the trainers. So
yeah.
you do a good UAT and you're happy with you could
Yeah,
stamp, your thing on it, your moniker to say, I'm happy this works from
yeah.
cradle to grave. If you don't do that, nobody else is going to do it for you.
Uh,
And you're going to come back to me and bitch about the
yeah.
fact, why did the foreign exchange difference go into this account? Well, because you didn't test it properly.
I, I think that's so true. I mean, I've seen people go white when they're told they're going to become the global process owner, or they're now the SME for something. They go white. But thank you, Andrew. That was a really good conversation. We'll tie it up there.
Yeah,
We'll do it again. Thank you for your time
good fun.
and have a good day.
And you, take
Cheers,
care.
mate. Bye bye.